You've been told yawning is about oxygen. It isn't. You've been told it's about boredom. It isn't that either. In 1987, Robert Provine at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, ran a direct test. He had college students breathe one of four gas mixtures for 30 minutes. Normal air, pure oxygen. Air with 3% carbon dioxide. Air with 5% carbon dioxide. The logic was simple. If yawning is triggered by low oxygen, breathing pure oxygen should suppress yawning. If it is triggered by high carbon dioxide, elevated CO2 should increase yawning. Neither happened. Both the high CO2 mixtures and pure oxygen increased breathing rate, confirming the gas manipulation worked. The lungs responded, but yawning did not change. Not the frequency, not the duration. The yawning system did not respond to blood gas levels at all. Provine ran a second study. He had participants exercise until their breathing rate doubled. If yawning and breathing shared a mechanism, exercise should affect yawning. It did not. The number of yawns during exercise was identical to the number before and after. The oxygen hypothesis was dead. Provine's conclusion was unambiguous. Yawning and breathing are controlled by completely different mechanisms. Yawning does not serve a respiratory function. Think about what this means. The explanation you were given in school, the one you have repeated to other people, the one that feels so obviously correct, you're tired, you need oxygen, you yawn to take a deep breath. It was tested directly, and it failed. Every version of it failed. The most intuitive explanation for one of the most universal human behaviors is simply wrong. So what is it for? By the end of this video, you will understand that yawning is a thermoregulatory mechanism, a brain-cooling pump. Your skull is a radiator, and yawning is the system that activates it. And when that system fails in multiple sclerosis, in stroke, in epilepsy, the consequences are measurable and immediate. This is the Dirac way. Open your mouth right now, as wide as it will go. Hold it for 5 seconds. Feel the stretch in your jaw joint. Feel air rush over the roof of your mouth. Feel the slight pressure change behind your eyes. What just happened is not a stretch. It is a thermal event. 3 things occurred simultaneously, and each one cooled your brain. But to understand how, you need to know something about the anatomy of your skull, because the answer involves a structure most people have never heard of, sitting millimeters from the main blood supply to your brain. The cavernous sinus, it is a network of venous channels that wraps around the internal carotid artery, the artery that carries blood from your heart to your prefrontal cortex. Venous blood from your nasal passages, your oral cavity, and your sinuses drains into the cavernous sinus. And because this venous blood surrounds the arterial blood, heat can transfer between them through the sinus walls. If the venous blood is cool, it cools the arterial blood, and cooler arterial blood reaches the brain. This is countercurrent heat exchange. The same physics that cools a penguin's feet in Antarctic water that prevents dolphins from losing core heat through their fins. The same engineering principle used in industrial heat exchangers. And it operates inside your skull, millimeters from the blood supply to the organ most sensitive to temperature in your entire body. Now, when you yawn, 3 mechanisms activate this system simultaneously. First, the powerful gape of the jaw increases blood flow to the skull and enhances venous return. Hypothermic blood that has been warming the brain, is forced away from the skull. Cooler blood from the lungs and extremities replaces it. Second, the deep inhalation draws ambient air across the vascular-rich tissues of your upper palate and nasal passages. This cools the venous blood draining into the cavernous sinus. Cool venous blood surrounds the internal carotid artery. Heat transfers through the sinus wall. Cooler arterial blood reaches the brain. Third, and this was not discovered until 2011, the jaw muscles flex the thin walls of your maxillary sinuses. Andrew Gallup and Gary Hack at the University at Albany found that the posterior wall of the maxillary sinus serves as an origin for both the medial and lateral pterygoid muscles. When these muscles contract during jaw opening, the thin sinus walls flex like a bellows, ventilating the sinuses and promoting evaporative cooling of the sinus mucosa. 3 mechanisms. 1 motor action, 1 result. Cooler blood reaches the prefrontal cortex. Your skull is a radiator. and yawning is the flush cycle. The elegance of this system is worth pausing on. Your brain weighs roughly 2% of your body mass, but generates approximately 20% of your metabolic heat. It is the most thermally active organ in your body, packed into an enclosed bony case with limited ventilation, and it is also the organ least tolerant of temperature increases. A rise of 1 to 2 degrees begins impairing executive function, response inhibition, and motor control. Your brain operates within a thermal margin so narrow that a mechanism for active cooling is not optional. It is a necessity. And the mechanism is hidden inside something so common, so automatic, so apparently meaningless, that nobody investigated it for centuries: a yawn. But here is where it gets strange. Because this is not speculation, this has been measured directly, inside the brain. In 2010, Melanie Shoup-Knox and colleagues at the University at Albany implanted thermocoupled probes in the prelimbic cortex of rats. They measured continuous brain temperature before, during, and after each yawn. The result was precise. Every yawn was preceded by a rapid increase in brain temperature. The cortex heated by approximately 0.11 degrees Celsius at a rate of roughly 0.1 degrees per minute. This rise was not gradual background warming. It was a sharp, intermittent spike, the kind of temperature change that signals a localized metabolic event, not a slow drift. This was the trigger. The brain was getting too warm, too fast. Then the yawn occurred. And within 18 seconds of the yawn completing, brain temperature began to decrease. It returned to baseline following each yawn. Every single time. Not most of the time, every time. And every increase in brain temperature of 0.1 degrees or greater corresponded to a yawning event. The two were locked together. Temperature rise, yawn, temperature fall. A feedback loop running in the prelimbic cortex with a cycle time of roughly 60 to 90 seconds. The brain heats. The yawn fires. The brain cools. Shoup-Knox also measured the preoptic area of the hypothalamus, the brain's thermostat, and found that it too cooled after yawns, though with a slight delay compared to the cortex. Both internal and external brain tissues cooled, but the cortex responded first. The cooling mechanism acts fastest where it is needed most, the prefrontal regions that handle your highest-order cognitive functions. In humans, the effect is larger. Gallup documented in 2010 that isolated bouts of excessive yawning reduced skull temperature by as much as 0.4 degrees Celsius. Infrared camera studies on high-frequency yawning rats confirmed surface cooling of 0.3 to 0.4 degrees at the cornea and ear within 10 seconds of each yawn, with return to baseline within 20 seconds. But if this is a cooling mechanism, it should have a constraint. It should only work under specific conditions. And there is one prediction that only the thermoregulatory theory makes, a prediction that no other hypothesis for yawning can explain. Yawning should be constrained to a thermal window. Think about what the mechanism requires. The deep inhalation during a yawn cools the brain partly through countercurrent heat exchange with the ambient air. For that exchange to work, the inhaled air must be cooler than the venous blood in the cavernous sinus. This means the mechanism has an operating range. If the ambient air is below body temperature, but not too cold, yawning should be most frequent. The air is cool enough to provide effective countercurrent cooling, and the brain is warm enough to benefit from it. If the ambient air is very cold, yawning should decrease. The brain is already being cooled passively by the cold environment, so the active mechanism is unnecessary. And if the ambient air approaches or exceeds body temperature, yawning should also decrease because the inhaled air is too warm to cool anything. The radiator has nothing to work with. This is a specific, quantitative prediction, and it eliminates every competing hypothesis. If yawning were about oxygen, it should not vary with ambient temperature at all. If it were about arousal, it should not track the thermal window. If it were about boredom or social cues, there is no reason outdoor temperature should matter. This is exactly what the data shows. Gallup and Eldekar published a comprehensive review in Frontiers in Neuroscience in 2013, covering 5 years of accumulated evidence. Their conclusion: over the past 5 years, numerous reports have confirmed and replicated the specific brain cooling and thermal window predictions derived from the thermoregulatory theory of yawning. And no study has found evidence contrary to these findings. No study in 5 years. Not one contradictory result. Yawning frequency varies with season. It varies with outdoor temperature on a given day. It varies within the same person across different thermal environments. Eldekar and colleagues tested this in 2015 by recruiting 142 pedestrians outdoors during summer in southern Florida, an equatorial monsoon climate where the thermal window shifts throughout the day, and confirmed the ambient temperature dependency in naturalistic conditions. The mechanism is constrained to the conditions under which it can physically do its job. This is not psychology. This is thermodynamics. Now, there is one more dimension to this, and it is the one that makes people uncomfortable: contagious yawning. You see someone yawn, and you yawn. This has been documented across humans, chimpanzees, dogs, gelada baboons, and even budgerigars. It is one of the most recognizable social reflexes in biology. And the standard explanation, empathy, mirror neurons, social bonding, is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Functional MRI studies have shown that observing a yawn activates the right inferior frontal gyrus, a region associated with the mirror neuron system. Susceptibility to contagious yawning correlates with empathy scores. You are more likely to catch a yawn from someone you are emotionally close to than from a stranger. And contagious yawning appears around age 4 to 5, coinciding with the development of higher empathic abilities. All of this is consistent with the empathy framework. But the thermoregulatory theory adds a layer that the empathy framework cannot. If yawning cools the brain, and the brain operates most efficiently within a narrow temperature range, then spreading yawning across a group has a collective benefit. Gallup proposed in 2007 that contagious yawning may function as group thermoregulation. If one brain in a social group is overheating, the brains around it may be overheating too. Same environment, same ambient temperature, same activity level. Triggering yawning across the group would enhance collective vigilance by cooling multiple brains simultaneously. The empathy component may be the mechanism of transmission, but the thermoregulatory benefit may be the reason the mechanism evolved. Think about what this means for early human groups. A band of 20 people on a savanna in late afternoon. The sun is high, ambient temperature is elevated. One individual's brain temperature rises past the threshold. They yawn. The yawn spreads through the mirror neuron system, through the empathic contagion pathway. Within minutes, the entire group has yawned. 20 brains, each running the cooling cycle. Collective vigilance enhanced. Collective cognitive performance maintained. Contagious yawning is not a quirk. It may be a distributed thermoregulation protocol. One brain triggers the alarm. The group responds. And here is the experiment that seals this interpretation. Gallup demonstrated in 2007 that nasal breathing completely eliminates contagious yawning. Participants watched videos of people yawning. Those breathing normally or through their mouths yawned contagiously 48% of the time. Those instructed to breathe nasally through their nose only yawned 0% of the time. 0. Nasal breathing cools the brain through the vertebral venous plexus and the frontal cortex blood supply. If the brain is already being cooled by nasal breathing, the yawning mechanism is not triggered. Even when the social stimulus is present, even when the mirror neurons fire, the thermoregulatory gate overrides the social trigger. In a second experiment, applying a cold pack to the forehead reduced contagious yawning to 9%. A warm pack, 41%. Cool the brain externally, and yawning is suppressed. Warm it, and yawning increases. The social contagion is real, but it is gated by thermal need. Now, what happens when this system fails? This is where the research stops being about why you yawn at your desk and becomes something with clinical weight. Pathological yawning, excessive, uncontrollable yawning that occurs dozens of times per hour, is documented across a striking range of neurological conditions: multiple sclerosis, migraine, epilepsy, stroke, brain injury, schizophrenia, basal ganglia disorders, even opiate withdrawal. At first glance, these conditions have nothing in common. Different anatomical sites, different etiologies, different symptom profiles. But they share one feature. Every one of them is associated with thermoregulatory dysfunction. In 2008, Gallup published a review in physiology and behavior, documenting this pattern systematically. Excessive yawning appears to be symptomatic of conditions that increase brain and/or core temperature. The yawning is not a side effect of the disease. It is not a random neurological misfire. It is the cooling mechanism working overtime, firing more frequently, because the brain can no longer regulate its temperature through normal channels and is calling on the backup system. In multiple sclerosis, patients are characteristically heat sensitive. An increase of even half a degree in core temperature can temporarily worsen neurological symptoms, a phenomenon called Uthoff's phenomenon. These patients frequently report excessive yawning. The cooling circuit is firing constantly because the demand has outstripped the normal supply. In stroke, the clinical significance is even more direct. Cataneo and colleagues reported in the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery and Psychiatry in 2006 that 2 patients presented with excessive yawning as their very first symptom of brainstem ischemia before any motor deficits, before speech impairment, before the patient or the clinician recognized the stroke was occurring. The cooling system detected the thermal crisis caused by disrupted blood flow before the patient was aware anything was wrong. The yawn was the first alarm. In epilepsy, periictal yawning has been documented, particularly in temporal lobe seizures. Some researchers have found that yawning during seizures can lateralize the seizure onset zone to the non-dominant hemisphere. The yawning pattern carries diagnostic information because it tracks the thermoregulatory disruption the seizure produces. And then there are the drug effects. SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the most commonly prescribed antidepressants in the world, are known to cause excessive yawning in some patients. Serotonin modulates thermoregulation. The drug connection is not sedative, it is thermal. And the cognitive consequences of the cooling failure itself are measurable. Your brain operates optimally at approximately 37.3 degrees Celsius. A core temperature increase of just 1 to 1.5 degrees impairs executive function, reduces response inhibition, suppresses motor cortical activity, and decreases cerebral perfusion. 65 functional connectivities between brain regions are disrupted, 50 weakened, 15 abnormally strengthened. The brain is the organ most vulnerable to overheating, and yawning is one of the mechanisms that prevents it. You began this video hearing that yawning is about oxygen. It is not. It has nothing to do with oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels, or breathing rate. Provine killed that hypothesis in 1987. What yawning is, when you trace the mechanism through the anatomy, is a brain cooling pump. The jaw stretches, blood flow changes, cool air crosses the palate. The cavernous sinus cools arterial blood heading to the prefrontal cortex. The maxillary sinuses ventilate, and within 18 seconds, brain temperature drops. The next time you yawn, which statistically may happen before this video ends, you will know what is actually happening. Your brain temperature rose above a threshold, a signal fired. Your jaw opened, and your skull flushed cooler blood to the organ that cannot afford to overheat. You are not tired. You are not bored. Your brain is hot, and it just turned on the radiator.